Coming up on this edition of Primetime News, the two failed prime minister nominations by the president and the political limbo that's followed are expected to put the brakes on the Korean government's reform drive. South Korea remembers the Korean War today on its 64th anniversary. The prime minister used the opportunity to emphasize the importance of a strong military. And the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board concludes pilot error was the main cause of the 2013 Asiana Airlines crash.
Hello and welcome to Primetime News. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Tae-ri. Thanks for tuning in. We begin with the significance of this day on Korean history. Citizens commemorated the 64th anniversary of the start of the Korean War.
Our Kim Hyun-bin spoke to surviving veterans from around the world and shows us how the nation honored their sacrifice.
64 years ago this Wednesday, North Korea launched a surprise attack on South Korea to start a three-year war that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. To commemorate the somber anniversary and those that sacrificed their lives, the Ministry of Patriots and Veteran Affairs hosted a ceremony at a stadium in the heart of Seoul on Wednesday. Prime Minister Chung Hong-won used the opportunity to emphasize the importance of a strong military.
North Korea has been continuously threatening our nation and is still developing its nuclear and missile programs, becoming a great military threat. The security situation is unstable on the peninsula. We acknowledge the situation and will prevent a recurrence of the tragedy that was the Korean War.
Around 2 million UN troops from 21 different countries put their lives on the line in the war. Some returned for Wednesday's ceremony and said they were pleasantly surprised to see how much Korea has developed over the past 6 decades.
I look at it now and I just can't believe it. You know, in 64 years, you know, to look and see what you people have done with the freedom that you won. It's just fantastic.
Other Korean War veterans expressed sadness that their sacrifices were starting to be forgotten.
Many kids these days don't know about the Korean War. Some are totally oblivious to what happened here. Our government needs to do a better job teaching our history.
Hundreds of thousands of patriots lost their lives to make Korea a free country. Their sacrifices should never be taken for granted. This ceremony not only pays tribute to veterans of the Korean War, it's also a time to remember the hard work South Korean soldiers do today to ensure our freedom. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
And we just saw a few of the faces who defended South Korea. More than 600,000 South Korean soldiers fought in the war, and nearly a third of them are still alive today.
And our Connie Lee met one of them who says the war should never be forgotten.
Around this time every year, he can't help but think of his brothers.
Although we fought in the war together, there are those still living today, while others died young. It still breaks my heart.
87-year-old Lee Chun-lak shows me the names of some of his veteran brothers from the Korean War, engraved in the black marble walls at one memorial hall. Lee's name is one of them. Rewind 64 years back. Lee was just a 23-year-old schoolteacher who had to trade in his books for combat boots as he was drafted into the war.
Because they were short on soldiers, if you were young, you were enlisted into the army. That was September 1950.
At his home, evidence of his time in the war are on the walls, in photographs and in letters. One letter dates back to 1953, written by one of his closest compatriots in his platoon, a U.S. soldier who went by the name Smitty.
There was an American soldier named Smith, Kenneth Smith. We were practically together everywhere.
Once the war ended and after a few letter exchanges here and there, they lost touch. Lee's been on the search for his American friend since then.
How great would it be to see each other after all of these years? When I see him, I want to tell him that we're more than just brothers.
Along with the memories of camaraderie are also the harrowing memories of war that not only left hundreds of thousands dead, but separated thousands of Korean families once that 38th parallel was drawn and divided the nation. Lee says he hopes the realities of the Korean War, along with all the sacrifices that were made, will never be forgotten in the generations to come.
The fact that our country exists today is from the sacrifices of the Korean War veterans who put their lives at risk to protect this nation. We cannot forget that.
Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Much like its neighbor to the south, North Korea is also going through a cabinet reshuffle of its own.
North Korean state media reported Wednesday that four-star General Hyon Yongchol had been promoted to the Minister of the Korean People's Army, which is equivalent to being the Secretary of Defense. He replaces Chang Jong-nam, who was promoted to the position just a year ago. The reshuffle is being seen as an attempt by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to tighten his grip on the military. Well, since the Korean War, China has been Pyongyang's strongest backer.
But recent events have pushed Beijing and Pyongyang apart, and experts say they're unlikely to become close again anytime soon. Connie Kim tells us more.
Relations between North Korea and China don't look the same as before, and their frosty ties are likely to continue in the foreseeable future. South Korea's Unification Ministry has confirmed that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un did not send a congratulatory message to Chinese President Xi Jinping for his birthday this month, unlike last year when Kim reached out, wishing him to realize his goal of achieving national prosperity. Experts in Korea and China point out that the planned visit to Seoul next month by President Xi, who has never been to Pyongyang as the head of state, suggests the dynamics of Sino-Korean relations appear to be shifting, considering Chinese leaders of the past have made it a point to visit Pyongyang before coming to Seoul. Kim Han-kwon of the Asan Institute for Policy Studies says Beijing appears to be seeking political and other cooperations with Seoul, as well as economic ties.
China used to maintain a balance, using the North for political purposes and the South for economic ones. But this is changing.
And Chinese experts agree. Professor Chu Surong of Tsinghua University at a forum in Beijing on Tuesday said President Xi is trying to put pressure on Pyongyang to end its nuclear development by cutting off some of its economic aids. China has also joined international sanctions since Pyongyang carried out a widely condemned nuclear test in February of last year by stopping to supply crude oil to the north for months and limiting banking transactions with the reclusive state. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
And tonight, as we mark the anniversary of the start of the Korean War, we're spending some time to talk about inter-Korean relations. And our Dr. Kim Chol-woo from the Korea Institute for Defense Analyses is joining us for this conversation. Welcome. Now, how do you assess inter-Korean relations at this point? Not much progress.
Unfortunately, not much progress. At this point, North Korea's primary goal is the survival and stabilization of the Kim Jong regime. So for the forthcoming couple of months or for the future, North Korea will remain as an unpredictable, very provocative state because including they'll take whatever risks, including the Jang Sung-taek's execution and provocations or the forced nuclear test. Whatever stakes they can use at this point.
Would it be wrong to say that most people are just waiting for the North to conduct another nuclear or missile test during this lull in inter-Korean relations? And if so, are we taking too passive of a stance? Shouldn't we be using this time when we don't have to be reacting to the North's behaviors to try to find alternative and more flexible scenarios?
In that sense, some analysts describe the situation of the kind of status quo situation of the Korean Peninsula as a strategic patience. which means, in a sense, doing nothing to solve the problem. So the Park Geun-hye administration will take an initiative after the multi-focus range for this coming July and August, and then will follow up by the Incheon Asian Games. That'll make a difference.
Let's talk about China's role in this. Recent report by Chinese scholars said that North Korea is more trouble than benefit, basically highlighting how Beijing doesn't like to be in this constant position that it's in, having to rein in Pyongyang. How do you think China's stance is going to change down the road?
China's stance is not just the Sino-North Korean relations. It's all related to the general overall security landscape in Northeast Asia. So I think the Park Geun-hye administration sees China as kind of a critical role in shaping North Koreans' bad behavior, in controlling North Koreans' bad behavior. So I think the Xi Jinping's coming to Seoul is a critical milestone in setting the new stepping ahead for the bright future, for the brighter side.
So what now? How do you predict the inter-Korean relations to play out down the road under Kim Jong-un's leadership? Do you think they're satisfied with this same old strategy of provocations on one hand and reconciliation on the other?
North Korea is like a sly fox. That's not dumb, you know. They know how to deal with the or election year politics or international situation here in Northeast Asia. So I think the trilateral cooperation among Seoul, Tokyo, and Beijing I would argue that it could be a very strong point in inviting the Beijing's response and the Pyongyang's new initiative to coming back to the negotiation or the peace-oriented maneuvers.
All right, Dr. Kim, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Curry's comments came in response to
your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Che-ri from the heart of Seoul.
Begins now.
Primetime News, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
Foreign Minister Byungse said problems arising from Japan's recent review of its landmark 1993 apology for its use of wartime sexual slavery must be dealt with straight on. He told reporters on Wednesday that no matter how skillfully Tokyo reforms the Kono statement, the essence of the issue does not change. On the same day, Japan's top government spokesperson Suga Yoshihide expressed his regret towards Korean Vice Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yong's deep expression of concern over Japan's review at his meeting with William Burns, the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State in Washington. Suga claimed that the Korean government was being too sensitive and should take another look at the new release from an objective point of view. There's little doubt among political circles and pundits that the resignation of Prime Minister nominee Moon Chang-guk on Tuesday has dealt a heavy blow to President Park Geun-hye, with two of her recent picks stepping down even before their confirmation hearings. It's back to the drawing board for her reform drive. Our Chae Yu-sun has more.
The withdrawal of President Park's second prime minister nominee in the past month has put the brakes on the president's reform drive brought on by April's ferry disaster. It's been 2 months since Prime Minister Chung Hong-hwan tendered his resignation for the government's lax response to the ferry accident, and the search for his successor has gone back to square one. There's a lineup of cabinet minister nominees awaiting confirmation hearings, and the details of a government restructuring plan remain in limbo. The back-to-back personnel appointment failures could come at a heavy price for the president and the ruling party ahead of next month's by-elections. There's mounting criticism within both the ruling and opposition parties over the presidential office's personnel verification system, and the opposition is demanding the presidential chief of staff take responsibility. This means lawmakers are likely to go over the president's nominees for 8 cabinet positions and the chief of the state intelligence agency with a fine-tooth comb at their confirmation hearings next month. Some of them have already come under fire, including the nominee to head the National Intelligence Service, Byungse, who's been implicated in illegal political funding activities in the past. Education Minister nominee Kim Myung-soo stands accused of plagiarizing students' thesis papers. Although the 9 nominees don't require parliamentary confirmation to be appointed by the president, what is said at their hearings could have an effect on the president and the ruling party. While there's speculation that President Bak is likely to select a politician as her next prime minister, opposition co-leader An Chol-soo has suggested the president consult with political parties before announcing her pick. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
We've been waiting for almost a year now to find out what went wrong and who's to blame for the crash of Asiana Airlines Flight 214 at San Francisco International Airport. Well, we've got the answer now. U.S. safety regulators say the crash was mainly caused by the crew's over-reliance and lack of command over the plane's automated system. Our Shin Se-min has the details.
Pilot error upon descent and an over-reliance on automated systems. That was the cause of last July's passenger plane crash at San Francisco International Airport, according to the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board. Investigators say Asiana Airlines Flight 214 came in too low and too slow in its landing approach, which caused the plane to slam into a seawall, ripping off the tail and sending the fuselage skidding down the runway. 3 people died and another 200 were injured in the crash. The NTSB added that the trainee pilot of the Asiana flight lacked sufficient training and inadvertently shut off an automatic speed control system that might have prevented the accident. A portion of the blame was also placed on Boeing for the complexities of the autothrottle on the 777 jet.
A lot of issues lined up the wrong way, as it turned out, to produce this result, because each one of those issues probably happens a lot by itself innocuously, but and in fact, if you removed any one of those links in the chain, this accident would not have happened.
Asiana Airlines in a statement said they accept the NTSB's conclusion and that they have been bolstering safety measures since last summer's crash. But the Korean-based airliner also pointed the finger at Boeing, citing inconsistencies with the autothrottle system, which they say led pilots to believe they could maintain the plane speed. Boeing is adamant the airplane performed as expected and that it did not contribute to the accident, saying the 777 has an extraordinary safety record and it is the pilots who were at fault. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Before it's too late will be the theme of a shocking anti-smoking campaign that hits the airwaves here in Korea starting tomorrow. It features a man in his 40s smoking a cigarette with a stressed expression on his face. A close-up shows a blood vessel bursting in his brain and then the man in a hospital bed. The Ministry of Health and Welfare hopes that this graphic video can bring down the country's smoking rate. Last year, Korea's smoking rate was the second highest among OECD members, barely trailing Greece. Iraq's prime minister has rejected calls for a national salvation government as the country threatens to be torn apart by Sunni militants.
With more on this story, we now turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Washington has been pushing Iraqi leaders to form a more inclusive government, but it appears they're taking a different approach to the crisis.
That's right. Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki dismissed on Wednesday the idea of a national unity government in the wake of the violent insurgency. But he did call for all political forces to reconcile in the face of what he called the terrorist onslaught. The Shiite Prime Minister, however, stopped short of promising greater representation in government for the Sunni Arab minority. He warned that such calls represented a coup against the constitution and an attempt to end the democratic process. Meanwhile, the Syrian splinter group of al-Qaeda has reportedly joined forces with militants led by the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL. The move is significant as it opens the way for ISIL to take control of both sides of the border near the town of Al-Qaim, which has been the launching point of major offensives. In the latest fighting, Iraqi army soldiers clashed with rebel fighters just west of the capital Baghdad on Tuesday, killing a number of militants and destroying their vehicles. And turning now to the crisis in Ukraine, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has blamed Russia for the slow progress in stabilizing eastern Ukraine, warning that Moscow could face tougher sanctions if it fails to act. Merkel made the remarks while addressing Parliament on Wednesday, saying that Ukrainian government troops were still being killed despite last week's unilateral ceasefire. She praised Ukrainian Petro Poroshenko's call for peace, while saying Russian President Vladimir Putin's decision not to intervene militarily in Ukraine was a step in the right direction. Poroshenko has warned he might end the truce, accusing pro-Russian separatists of breaking the ceasefire more than 40 times since it began. The United Nations estimates more than 420 people have been killed due to the conflict since April. And finally, this Wednesday marks the 5th anniversary of the untimely death of Michael Jackson, one of the greatest pop artists that ever lived. Despite the drama and controversy surrounding his death, Jackson's legacy lives on with a new studio album, music videos, and a Las Vegas show that pays tributes to his undying star power. The single Love Never Felt So Good, originally recorded in 1983, has been re-released by Epic Records in a partnership with the Jackson family estate. The relative success of the album is a testament to the king of pop, who died of an overdose of propofol and other powerful sedatives in 2009 as he was getting ready for a series of comeback concerts in London. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. Now we start at the World Cup, of course, where we see the players give it their all, their blood, a lot of sweat and tears for their country. Well, the Uruguay-Italy match had that and much more thanks to Luis Suarez. After a listless first half, things started to get heated after Italy's Marchisio earned a straight red card in the 59th for a hard tackle. Then it reached the climax when Uruguay point man Luis Suarez appeared to take a bite out of defender Giorgio Chiellini's shoulder, but avoided a booking because simply the ref didn't see it. Now, Uruguay scored 2 minutes later in the 81st minute to win 1-0 over Italy and advance. But from here on out, the Sky Blues will likely be without Suarez, who's now facing yet another lengthy ban pending a FIFA investigation and ruling. Meanwhile, it's the other group, the fixture between Costa Rica and England. And for its purposes, Costa Rica was already locked for the next round, while England was already eliminated. Well, despite a spirited fight, mostly in the midfield, the match drew 0-0, sending the Three Lions home without a score. But Costa Rica moves on to face the second seed of Group C. And that brings us to Group C's decisive meeting between Greece and Côte d'Ivoire for the second spot. Now, Greece put in the opener, but the jubilation faded when Wilfred Boney equalized late in the second half. Perhaps playing for the draw, the Ivorians lacked the edge to close out as Giorgio Samaris earned a penalty kick 3 minutes into injury time after taking a dive. He converted, and Greece won the match 2-1 in stunning fashion. And finally, it was Japan playing against Colombia to stay alive in Brazil. Now, they were aggressive offensively early on, eventually getting a Shinji Okazaki equalizer in the first, but a pair of Jackson Martinez goals brought Colombia back for the resounding 4-1 victory. And with that, Colombia now faces Uruguay, and Greece takes on Costa Rica in the round of 16. Well, that wraps up our look at the World Cup. This has been Stephen Che. I'll see you back here later for more from the world of sports.
Monsoon rains are set to hit Jeju tomorrow.
And for more, our Kim Bo-kyung joins us from the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, how are we looking?
If you are in Jeju, an umbrella will be a must for the next couple of days, and that's because monsoonal fronts are moving towards the island, which should lead to evening showers there tomorrow, dropping between 5 to 30 millimeters. Well, at the moment, we are seeing cloudy skies nationwide, and on Thursday, a typical hot summer day is forecast nationwide with the exception of Jeju. Conditions should get hotter by the day, but Saturday's drizzles in the central regions will bring a temporary cool down. Moving on to Thursday's readings, Seoul tops out at 29 degrees, while Daegu and Gwangju hit the low 30s. On to other places, Jeju reaches 23, Dokdo makes it to 22. And for those of you following the World Cup, it looks to be sunny for Rio, whereas rainy conditions are forecast for Natal and Sao Paulo. That's all for now, but I'll be back with more after midnight.
All right, thanks, Po-kyung, and that wraps up this edition of Primetime News. Thanks for watching.
And we'll be back here at the same time tomorrow. Good night.